Okay, hello again. This time I'm going to briefly cover the episode A Friend in Need. I think it was probably, for me, the standout episode of Season 4 thus far. Other than Shadow Warrior, I think is probably still my favorite. It's a real pity that there wasn't a whole arc devoted to that, but I'm a sucker for anything that takes place on Naboo. Anyway, I really just, more than anything, just thought it was a gorgeous episode. The snow time setting with the cherry blossoms, the Mandalorians flying around that environment with their battered armor. We see that they've seen some wear and tear since their first appearance in Season 2. It's really just electric to look at. Just the colors really pop. It was pretty amazing how Dave Filoni really coordinated that whole environment, because from the snow to the Mandalorian camp with all the tents set up, to their armor, it's just something that is just very engaging from a visual standpoint. As far as the story itself goes, I like that it had the cliffhanger that it did, with Lux drifting off, and we know that he's going to be out there somewhere, and that undoubtedly he'll reappear at some point. And we have to wonder how Ahsoka, what goes through her head, wondering about him, because obviously the two have grown close. I find it a little bit off-putting in some ways when people make a lot of hay about their perceived romantic attachment between those two characters, because I really, from everything I understand through interviews with Ashley Eckstein to things that Dave Filoni has remarked upon, there is not supposed to be any sort of real romantic bond there. It's more of just a strong friendship, and I feel like that's a more interesting route to take, particularly because of Ahsoka's ideals clashing with Lux's. The idea that they can be of such differing minds but yet still somehow find common ground is very appealing as a story point, and within the characterization of those two. I love that Pre Vizsla, has obviously seen better days. He's got stubble, he's got scars, his hair is, his pompadour is now gone and replaced with a buzz cut. What for me really stood out, beyond the opening sequence with all the snowdrifts and cherry blossoms, was towards the end with the village. All of the villagers and the village itself seem to be very inspired by Kurosawa, which we know is a huge influence on Lucas, always has been and continues to be to this day. If you've ever seen a Kurosawa film, then likely you were thinking the same thing whenever they showed up in that village. It looks like all of the peoples of that area are highly influenced by our real life Tibetan culture, but within kind of a Japanese landscape. I will say that the murder of the granddaughter was probably, for me, one of the most horrific things that has been depicted in the series thus far. I would actually say that, yes, for me personally, that was the heaviest hitting. My jaw really dropped when that occurred, because of the brutality of it. We've seen decapitation. We saw decapitation fivefold in this episode alone. We've seen decapitations all along. We've seen limbs whacked off by lightsabers. We've seen people impaled with lightsabers. We have seen quite a bit of brutality here and there, because after all, this is a galactic war. And I give much kudos to Dave Filoni and crew for not pulling any punches. But for the for Pre Vizsla to so coldly kill the granddaughter character, particularly while she's reuniting with her grandfather, and as she's hugging him is when he runs her through. That was pretty intense, and as hard as it is to watch, it's nonetheless something that I feel is very needed. It really makes the series feel worthwhile in terms of the story, the emotional content that it's trying to convey. As I said, they're not pulling any punches. They're really keeping in line with the emotional intensity of the live-action films by having occasional flourishes like that. And it makes us really go from having a slight modicum of respect for Pre Vizsla, perhaps from his season 2 turn, to now I would think that most people would just flat out despise him. Before we could kind of understand why he and his band were jaded, but over time they've kind of unraveled and become brigands themselves. I wrote a piece early on in writing for the Examiner about the Clone Wars, where I compared the Mandalorian Death Watch to the real-life Missouri Baldknobbers, which were a vigilante group. If you've not read that article of mine, be sure to go back down the timeline and find my publication over that. And you'll find a lot of parallels that I discuss between that stranger than fiction story that actually occurred in our own history to the Death Watch members in the Clone Wars. And I was speculating back then how things were going to unfold, and it's very telling that these same Death Watch characters are pretty much kind of meeting the path along the way that the real life Baldknobbers followed. So I could point to some predictions about what will become of them before the series is over. I may save that for a future article this coming late spring, early summer, once we're in the black again between seasons. That'd be a great time to revisit that topic based on what we've learned thus far in season 4. But anyway, I want to give hats off once again to Dave Filoni and his crew. A standout episode. I really wish it had been a 2 to 3 episode arc, but then we did get Deception following that, which has not failed to impress me on any level. So season 4 has really been rolling along at a very brisk pace, and I'm happy to be covering this content and sharing ideas, and I encourage everyone to please comment below and give me some of your own feedback. I would like to incorporate some reader opinions in future videos or future write-ups, and certainly I would like to conduct some more contests in the near future, so definitely keep participating, sending in your own comments and questions, and we'll go from there. So look for me in my next video covering the Deception arc. Take care.